Ejection seats have weight restrictions. Now, that may not impact you, but progressively it is impacting
We
me.
shall get Vishnu to lose a little weight so that he can fit into a cockpit the next time. Because when he actually flew a fighter, he was much thinner than he is right now.
And, Shiv, very importantly, a made in India aircraft, at least part of it, would be going to the United Arab Emirates, to Serbia, to Indonesia, to France.
My hair still stands on end when I say those.
I go back
letters.
to the MRCA days,
Yeah.
right? When you started work, they added another M to it.
This is win-win for India in terms of the global supply chain.
Without this entire Tata collaboration, the first Rafales or whichever aircraft would start coming in 10 years from now.
I know as far as Indian procurement is concerned, nothing is over until it's over.
So, Shiv, I
tactical
saw an
aircraft.
Aroor flying past my house. It was about 9 in the morning a couple of days back.
Yeah.
I am a spotter, so I live in Saket. I looked up and I noticed a beautiful plane. I went inside. I had breakfast. I came out, it was still there. But carry on with your story.
A lot of very tantalizing threads to this story, and I want to make sure that you and I, Vishnu, separate them and discuss them threadbare because it's important. Great to have you on episode 6 of Control Alt Defense, India's most watched defense and strategic affairs podcast. Vishnu and I were actually planning something else for episode 6.
We were.
But in came this news break yesterday, Vishnu, a day after we're actually recording this episode, that stole the headlines.
Yep.
I led with it on my show as well.
Yeah.
About perhaps the most talked about aircraft, not just in the context of Operation Sindoor, but it's something that everybody knows about for various reasons that we will, of course, get into in this
Right.
episode. Obviously, those who are loyal to this podcast know we're talking about the Rafale, but huge news. Huge news. Did you know this was coming? That the makers of the Rafale, and that, of course, is the headline, has tied up with India's Tata Group, and Tatas are going to build entire Rafale fuselages. That's the main body of the aircraft in India, in a brand new factory.
Yeah, the TASL, Tata Advanced Systems Limited. And what are they going to be doing? Key structural sections, including the lateral shells of the rear fuselage, the complete rear section, the central fuselage, and the front section.
That's the whole thing.
It's in terms of the structure, apart from the wings, that's a very large component of the aircraft. That's huge.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about why it is.
That's incredible. Tata, which we'll get into a little deeper, does an incredible amount of work that people don't know about.
Yeah.
They build stuff for the Apache, I think the entire fuselage of the Apache. They do a lot of work for the C-130J.
Yeah.
They do work for the F-16 wings, the Chinook tail section, etc. But this is the first fuselage of a combat fighter aircraft that they're going to get into. Let's first talk about, Vishnu, what we're talking about. What is this work we're talking about? Then we'll talk about the importance and the implications.
No, I think let's talk a little bit about the importance because that's top of my mind. The reason we are having this conversation is because it basically implies that if the Rafale is picked for the Indian Air Force for a further order of 114 aircraft, it would only be viable as a deal if this entire production facility in Hyderabad comes up.
Yeah.
Why is that the case? Because presently the French Dassault has a backlog of 220 Rafale aircraft. That means they would need between 7 to 10 years to clear the backlog. The Rafale is really not of very much use to us, certainly not as much use to us if it were acquired within a finite period of time as opposed to starting 10 years from now. We need these Rafales now. Why is that the case? Because the deal for 114 aircraft, which is what the Indian Air Force was looking at, started in 2018?
Yeah.
7 years down the road, Shiv, how many of those MRFAs have we got?
Yeah.
A big zero.
Yeah, correct.
Right? And considering the number of years it actually takes for these jets to be manufactured and then be delivered, if this facility doesn't actually start working, and assuming that the Indian Air Force picks the Rafale, and that's a big if still, because there is a legal process, we're not forgetting about that. And we're not pushing the Rafale here either.
Of course not.
Right?
Yeah.
That facility would be critical in meeting that requirement. And, Shiv, very importantly, a made in India aircraft, at least part of it, would be going to the United Arab Emirates, to Serbia, to Indonesia, to France.
Yeah.
right? The Rafale will be partly
So there are
made in India.
a lot of very tantalizing threads to this story, and I want to make sure that you and I, Vishnu, separate them and discuss them threadbare because
Yeah.
it's important. Number one, Vishnu is talking about the MRFA,
Yeah.
which is the multi-role fighter aircraft, which is a contest, like you said, a legal process, where the Indian Air Force has been mandated to choose between a selection of foreign fighters.
Yeah.
Some of which it will buy off the shelf, but most of which it will build here in India, presumably about 100. So the number is 114.
Right.
Now, the reason why this MRFA is on the table before the Indian Air Force, Vishnu, is
My pet
of
subject.
course a painful and bittersweet tale, and I will very quickly relate it because we need to assume that at least some of our listeners and viewers may not be aware of that history. There was something called the MMRCA, and my hair still stands on end when I say those.
I go back
letters.
to the MRCA days,
Yeah.
right? When you started work, they added another M to it.
So let me decode this alphabet soup.
Right.
MMRCA stood for Medium Multi-Role Combat Aircraft.
With two engines.
Yeah, a twin-engine fighter aircraft contest in
included.
which the government, and this was under the UPA government, it was decided that the Indian Air Force needed to acquire 126 fighters. Now, to cut a long and very, very troubled story short, the UPA government was bundled out of power. Before they did, they had down-selected and chosen the Rafale, but as it turned out, finances didn't work out, and there were other factors as well, as a result of which a deal was not closed with Rafale. In comes the Modi government in 2014. In 2015, Prime Minister Modi is in France. He announces that a deal is going to be signed with Dassault for the Rafale, but not for 126 fighters, only for 36 fighters, because the Air Force had basically said, boss, look, we have spent the better part of a decade selecting this fighter. We need fighters. Whatever number you can figure out, whatever we can afford right now, let's do it. We'll put Make in India a little later, but we need these fighters now. So those 36 fighters began arriving during the COVID pandemic. All 36 are there with the Indian Air Force right now. But since Vishnu, what was supposed to be 126 fighters only ended up as 36, a small percentage. That's the reason why we're talking about the MRFA now.
No, exactly right. But let's just go a little further back into this process because there are different ways of looking at this. And there's a reason I'm doing this. Way back in the late 90s, in early 2000s, we started looking at an MRCA where the Indian Air Force was looking at single engine replacement aircraft, right? The French said, all right,
your
fine,
favorite
go ahead.
aircraft.
Go ahead. Go ahead, let's talk about the Mirage 2000. We sat on the file. The French said, sorry, that ain't happening anymore. We are shutting down the Mirage 2000 assembly. The Mirage 2000 still taking part in Op Sindoor, still a wonderful aircraft. We never went in for that. So they said, okay, great. We've got something now called the Rafale. It is better in all respects, almost all respects, than the Mirage 2000. So we had nothing to do. We needed to start considering other aircraft. We then in 2007 now started something called the MMRCA process where we also started looking at other aircraft, right? Twin engine, the F-18 twin engine, the Eurofighter twin engine, Rafale twin engine, MiG-35 twin engine, right? The Gripen single engine, among others. No, in fact, I think that's essentially
And the Typhoon as well.
And the Eurofighter Typhoon, a twin engine, right? 2007, everybody got very excited. The entire process was looking like it was going to happen. Then we went into 2008. By 2015, it was hopelessly stuck, right? It wasn't happening. In fact, it was in 2015. In fact, it was by 2013 that it was hopelessly stuck. Why? Because the aircraft that the IF wanted, which was the Rafale, they could never realize a price for this to be manufactured at Hindustan Aeronautics, which is what the overall goal was. Dassault, the manufacturer of the jet, also refused to certify components of the aircraft which were manufactured by HAL, saying that, hello, we will only certify, or we can only certify parts of the aircraft or the aircraft itself in its entirety if it's manufactured in our facility. We cannot do that.
We cannot vouch for something that's not manufactured by us.
Manufactured. That went down the tubes after all of those years. 8 years it went down the tubes. In 2015, we scrapped MMRCA, which we'd started in 2007. 2016, we signed on for just 36 Rafales. And I think it was in 2018 that we started MRFA. We are now in 2025 and we haven't got a single one. Suppose you and I were the CCS, of course we are. But if we really were, and we signed on to this deal, right? Right now, without this entire Tata collaboration, the first Rafales or whichever aircraft would start coming in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
I mean, so what are we talking about? Here we've got a Chinese threat right in the north. They've got 6th generation aircraft coming out. The Rafale is only 4.5. Our Air Force loves it. We'll talk about generations later on. The Pakistanis have a generation 4.5 jet.
a cloud of
the
a
J-10
threat.
as well. We haven't acquired these planes. Hello? What are we waiting for? If the Indian Air Force has stated they need it, then they aren't just thinking up, something which they don't require.
No, but what you're saying right now goes to the heart of the issue. And, Vishnu, the fact that the Chinese already have an operational, so-called 5th generation stealth fighter in the J-20. They've got the J-35 that will be entering service soon. They're going to be supplied to Pakistan as well. Like you said, 2 6th generation platforms have begun flight test. And we, of course, will do a separate episode on what these generations really mean. But the pressure on the Indian Air Force to get fighters, forget about stealth aircraft. The Indian government has made it clear that we're going to bet on the AMCA, which is India's own fighter. But getting these 4.5 generation fighters like the Rafale, which you've already sunk an enormous amount of money into, even the Indian Navy has signed on for them recently, and there are still these delays. But with this announcement, Vishnu, and that's my next question now, I'm wondering whether this means that things are much clearer as far as the MRFA, or we still can't jump the gun on that. I know as far as Indian procurement is concerned, nothing is over until it's over, right? Nothing is over until it's over, especially when the Rafale is theoretically competing against American fighters like the F-15 Eagle II.
Yeah.
You've got Putin's Sukhoi 35s. You've got the Typhoon theoretically as well. So it ain't over until it's over, and I completely agree with you on that. But by putting out this partnership, and this is not an MOU. This is an agreement which I'm assuming is going to fructify into a joint venture.
Yeah. 2028
is when the first fuselages will roll out.
Off,
which again I'm assuming means that work begins now. 2028 is 2 years away. That's like more than just a foot in the door.
No, I would suggest that they are leading in this competition. All the Indian Air Force officers that we speak to, and they couch this language carefully, so I'm going to be responsible in how I report this. They say that they've had an exceptional experience with the Rafale. The Rafale is the aircraft of choice for them, but they will go through this process. It is a legal process. It goes down to pricing, tendering, terms, capability of the aircraft, relevance, weapon systems, integration with Indian weapons, and all of that, and then a decision will be taken. Now, we had that same language which was stated in 2018, 2019, same language.
We've heard this before.
2025, nothing has changed, right? However, we've got 26 naval Rafales as well. We will be acquiring them from a few years down the road as a special arrangement. We're getting them starting out in 2028, maybe a handful of them. But India wants 140, and the French would jump at that. Any defense manufacturer in the world would jump at that. If our requirement is that, look,
you can't let go of that.
We need it now, or we are finally waking up to the fact that we need it as soon as possible. Then they will all set up, or certainly the French have already acted, and they're setting up this facility. And the Tatas are, and the French are working with them for pre-production agreements or for agreements specific to the production of these components. But I'll tell you where it's worthwhile for Dassault. Suppose this order that we are talking about for more Rafales for India doesn't happen. With 220 aircraft in a backlog, including for France, primarily, the United Arab Emirates, I think, may have even more jets. Indonesia, Serbia, and other customers as well, they are sorted. The Rafale never had any orders when this entire process started. It was only for the French. It was not working out financially for them. Dassault was in all sorts of trouble because after the relative success of the Mirage 2000, the Rafale in a sense was very much a late bloomer. It came into its own much later on.
And also thanks in part to India's...
But thanks to the United Arab Emirates, my friend. Look at the number of orders which, we will eventually... have, I think, close to the same number of aircraft they do because you combine the Air Force and the Navy orders. And if this happens, then, we'll be close to France in terms of the total number. But it's an aircraft that has won incredible recognition. It's a fantastic platform.
So, no matter which way this goes, this Tata facility that's going to be building these fuselages,
It's a win-win for India.
Whether or not India chooses the
Yeah.
Rafale, and that's a very big whether or not,
Yeah.
because this does give Dassault a very big, huge, meaningful, substantive advantage in the contest. This is win-win for India in terms of the global supply chain. Those fuselages will go into Rafales for other customers.
And I'll tell you how it's, there is an ecosystem of defense manufacturing which is only now expanding in India.
Yeah.
Young aerospace engineers coming out of Indian aerospace regional colleges, regional engineering colleges will be working over there. They'll be trained up by Dassault. They will be working for the Tatas. They'll be trained up further by the Tatas. They will be required to work on absolutely state-of-the-art aerostructures. They would be Indian component manufacturers who would be part of that ecosystem that sort of feeds into what the Tatas are looking to manufacture. The Tatas would need to deliver with micron-specific separations and to ensure that what they're delivering absolutely state-of-the-art.
Yeah.
As more orders come in, that entire plant gets, it generates more revenue, it generates more jobs and all of that. And may I just go far, far ahead and suggest that this isn't going to end with the Rafale because the French are already looking at their 6th generation or the 5th generation aircraft, fifth plus, call it whatever you want, because the technologies are still changing. What is to say that may not be something which comes into play over here as well? Now, what does that mean for India? That's great. That means literally thousands of jobs.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that is at the heart of Atmanirbhar. When people say Atmanirbharta, they think A to Z, this entire fighter plane is going to be built in India. No, components are.
Yeah.
Because it makes more
Which
sense
is what
for
happens
final
in France
assembly
as well. Yeah.
to perhaps take place elsewhere.
Correct.
But the fact that you've got Indians, earning a job, earning jobs, earning skills, the fact that you're exporting, so you're earning revenue within India, that's huge.
Yeah. Not a lot of people know, and I named some of the things that Tata Advanced Systems Limited already, builds here in India. We tracked it very closely. The biggest project that the Tatas have been involved in is the manufacture of an entire aircraft, the C295 military transport aircraft.
That's right.
A joint venture with Airbus.
The Aroor replacement.
The Avro replacement aircraft. It's a big.
So Shiv, I
tactical
saw an
airlift
Avro flying past my house. It was about 9 in the morning a couple of days back.
Yeah.
I am a spotter, so I live in Saket. I looked up and I noticed a beautiful plane. I went inside. I had breakfast. I came out. It was still there. But carry on with your story.
No, seriously. But beautiful aircraft, old aircraft have their place. But the C295 project that Tata is involved in, is in many ways their big test.
Yeah.
And those aircraft deliveries, there are tight timelines. There's a lot of pressure on Tata to get those aircraft out on time to the Indian Air Force as well. But it also shows that companies like Tata, and there are many others in this ecosystem, have been quietly doing much, much more complicated work right here in India. This is no longer just aerostructures and assemblies.
Yeah.
This is not subsystems. They're building entire airframes.
Yeah, they're building entire airframes to different designs, different specifications, different requirements for different forces. And they're doing this, at a very, very high standard of production because, these are all certifiable components and various regulators across the world, because the C295 is also a civilian aircraft depending on the avatar that you want it in. So it would need to be certified at various levels. So you can't go wrong. You go wrong, A, it's dangerous, and B, you lose licensing, you lose your credibility, and that's not something that Tatas are going to get into at all.
Yeah.
So that's, it is impressive. And, we're talking about the Tatas. There are other companies as well in India that are doing great work. Dynamatics, for example, with fuselages. The fact that they've mastered carbon fiber technologies, and the spin-offs of that technology for any other platform, not necessarily even aircraft, that's absolutely huge. And we're talking about aircraft, Shiv. I mean, just look at the work that we've managed as far as manufacturing ships is concerned.
Yeah.
That's going to be many episodes of Control All Defense. Again, the more the orders come, the more the ecosystem builds up. It's just win-win for India. Yeah. This needs to be the heart of Atmanirbharta. And I will say one thing about Atmanirbharta. Where people get it wrong, they say that we need to manufacture A to Z of every single aircraft. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel if you don't need to. For example, why would you necessarily want to spend X thousands of crores potentially in developing, for example, ejection seats? When the Russians, Zvezda, R36 Delta ejection seat or the Martin Baker series ejection seats are some of the best in the world. You don't need to be working on that component. You've got a certain amount of expertise in other areas. But yes, of course, when it comes to something fundamental like the engine, that's where we need to do a lot of work. That's another episode of Control All Defense.
Completely. And I agree with you. Vishnu and I are actually planning an entire episode on engines.
Yeah, I mean, because that's such a
I will we will touch upon engines in this episode as well, but I think it deserves an entirely maybe an episode or two actually, because there's so much ground to cover on that. But coming back to the Rafale, Vishnu, the Rafale is in service with the Indian Air Force. 36 of them are in service with the Indian Air Force. The Rafale, the company that makes the Rafale, Dassault Aviation, has announced the setting up of an MRO, not very far from where we're recording this podcast.
That's right, I forgot about that.
In Uttar Pradesh.
Yes.
It's going to be a large global MRO for Rafale aircraft and other Dassault-made aircraft as well, which is a big deal. Now you've got the Tata deal. You've got the Navy deal as well. So I'm just wondering, how does the MRFA even happen then? Why does the MRFA honestly need to happen? And again, Vishnu, you and I are not pushing any aircraft because ultimately we understand.
And they're all great aircraft.
These decisions are geopolitical, they're political, they're based on relationships. The other aircraft, like you said, in the theoretical mix are all terrific aircraft.
Yeah.
One of my favorite aircraft in the world happens to be the F-15, so I would be rooting for the F-15 on any given day.
Yeah. I've flown on the prototype of that, the Gripen E prototype.
So I've flown in, correct. Not the prototype, but I've flown on the Gripen, I think it was the D.
The Delta,
The Delta.
Yeah.
So these are all fabulous aircraft, and at many different levels, they do meet India's requirements. I think we can safely say that the Eurofighter Typhoon, which was quote unquote defeated in that final selection in 2010 by the Rafale, may not be in the reckoning anymore. At least there's no reason to believe that it might be. But I'm just wondering, is this a foregone conclusion or should it be? Because if the Air Force says we don't have time to waste, and I remember, a former Boeing India head's words, he said the MMRC was a beauty pageant on specs. And the Indian Air Force was very convinced that they were doing a patentable selection process, but see how that ended up.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy to be thinking about the MRFA as due process now?
No, look, I think there's a great deal of sense in what the Indian Air Force says. That, look, we operate 36 of these aircraft. The Navy is getting a bunch of these aircraft. We worked with the system. It works for us. It's got specs that mean something for us. It integrates some of the systems we want. We will want to integrate more systems and more weapons. That's subsequently. It's got a helmet-mounted sight that is ours. It's got a specific SATCOM system, which is what we wanted, exactly the way it is. It's got an India-specific designation until the F4 version of the Rafale comes out. What India operates is actually the most advanced variant in the world. I think the F4 is now entering service with the French. When it was ordered and was being inducted, our jets were the most advanced in the world. It's got an Israeli towed decoy system as well. Not many other countries, if any, operate something like that. So if you have gone and invested in this technology, we spent a bomb on India-specific upgrades for that aircraft.
Yeah.
We negotiated a price which essentially means, as a result of those India-specific upgrades having been designed, developed and deployed for the Indian Air Force, subsequent aircraft would perhaps have a lower cost than what the initial cost was.
Right.
But you can't make that exact comparison. Why? Because of inflation.
Right.
So we need to keep that into the mix as well. But the price that you get would sort of take into account the development costs which have already gone in to several India-specific. So look, how many aircraft do you want? A couple of years back, Shiv, as we've covered the Air Force, we had MiG-21s, MiG-23s. Back in the day, MiG-25s, you saw the last MiG-25s retire. MiG-27s, MiG-29s, Sea Harriers for the Navy, Jaguars, the Sukhoi 30, right?
A museum of aircraft.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
Right? So, therefore, if we already operate the Rafale, it's a multi-role aircraft, it meets certain requirements. Do you need more? What should the future Indian Air Force be? It should be the same type. So, essentially, more Rafales. The AMCA for sure. You've got more than 260 odd Sukhoi 30s, which desperately need to be upgraded because the airframes are still very new, relatively speaking. Right? That has to be there, and variations and of the Tejas. And that's it. Because the Mirage 2000 will have to be retired, the Jaguars will have to go, the MiG-21s, heaven knows why we still have them in service, right? That has to go. The MiG-29s would have to go as well.
Yeah,
Right? So
eventually.
therefore,
Correct.
you need to standardize, and for the first time in our IAF history, be smart about the fact that, look,
Yeah.
we want just 3-4 jets,
Yeah.
ideally 3. And then we work on that, we build those, right? In fact, it'll be 4. If we get more Rafales, there'll be the AMCA, there'll be the Tejas, and there'll be the Sukhoi 30.
Yeah. So the sense I'm getting, of course, is that the multi-role fighter aircraft contest selection process for 114 aircraft, it'll have to reflect in some form or the other. I imagine it's going to be nowhere near what the painful long MMRCA process was, and all of these steps indicate that the system seems to be consolidating towards a decision. I could be wrong, but these things are not small. You know, the
No.
building of a fuselage is not some kite flying. But Vishnu, before I move to the next step about the Air Force, and we'll talk more about the Rafale, I wanted to quickly understand this because a lot of people were asking this on social media. Would an Indian built fuselage mean that the Rafale's acquisition cost actually comes down if we buy more?
No, I don't think Dassault is going to price it less.
Yeah.
Dassault would acquire that component at a lower
Right.
cost, but I don't think they would bring down the
So
cost.
India wouldn't have leverage on that?
That's a commercial for an Indian. No, I don't think so. I think, however, the way, and that's a great question, India would look at it is that, yes, on the one hand, as a country, we are having to pay a certain amount for the aircraft, but the return is coming from the fact that it's being built in India,
Ecosystem.
jobs are being generated, it supports an ecosystem of components, it fuels Indian industry, and it generates Indian exports. A part of that would be accrued to the system,
Correct. Yeah.
right? But whether that brings down the cost of the aircraft, that's certainly something the government would want to negotiate. My sense is that wouldn't be the case.
The other question related to the Indian-built fuselages, the fuselage is a shell
Yeah.
of the aircraft. But I think it's presumable that given that Tata is a company that has demonstrated the ability to really get into the bones of aircraft and do complex work, including R&D and innovation, I think it's reasonable to sort of assume that this will become a more complicated facility going forward.
Well, Shiv, we'll have to wait and see.
So my
that
question,
happens.
so my question is a specific one, Vishnu. Would this give the Indian Air Force or the Indian Navy, its operators here in India, some kind of a way to modify, get under the hood of the Rafale? I mean, I'm talking about officially,
Yeah.
with the French on board.
Yeah.
But, a kind of easier way to have a greater degree of control over what goes into the Rafale.
You know, Shiv, that's at the heart of the problem
Yeah.
with Dassault right now. We love the aircraft. We want to integrate our own weapons because our own weapons, like the Astra Mark II, there'll be something called the Astra Mark III as well. That's totally coming of age. In fact, when it comes into service, will outrange the Meteor, which is the primary air-to-air missile of the Rafale. Now, the French are very clear. We aren't going to hand over our source codes. However, what we will do is we will work with you and we will help you integrate your platforms. It has to be sort of integrated into the the flight control system, not the flight control system, the weapons management system, the head-up display, the head-down display, various MFDs, etc., etc. The helmet-mounted sensors, and they want a price for it. They want to pay for every single weapon system. Presumably, the French want India to pay something more.
Yeah.
We will certify it, we will test it. Now, that's something we don't want to necessarily do because we have the in-house experience to do it ourselves at home. Now, let me give you an example of the Mirage 2000. And the French frowned upon this.
Yeah.
They
During
said that, no,
Kargil?
don't. During Kargil and afterwards. That Mirage 2000 has been modified to fire Russian A-11 Archer or R-73 missiles. During the Kargil war, it was integrated with Israeli, lightning pods. It dropped laser-guided bombs as well.
And this was Jugaad.
It was Jugaad. It was done at home. We managed to get hold, along with Israeli, and I've written about this, with Israeli engineers, access to the source codes that we required. We made it happen. The French frowned even more, but we kept doing it because there was a real requirement for it. other weapon systems were also subsequently integrated. For example, the Spice was integrated as well. Something called the Crystal Maze was also integrated.
Spice is what we used in Balakot.
Yeah, and Crystal Maze was also something which was deployed. We won't get into whether it was actually used or not, but that was certainly another weapon system which was there. There are other weapon systems and other aspects of Jugaad which were actually done. It was driven by the Air Force in terms of engineering solutions. Now the French after that have said that, no, look, sorry, that ain't working for us. The Rafale is a gold mine for us in terms of the IP rights, in the source codes, and all of that. If you want to modify it, we can talk about it, then you pay for it and we'll do it for you. That may not work for India, but I believe if we do 114 aircraft, that is something we are going to be really pushing hard to do and say that, look, this price includes these weapon systems, Indian weapon systems, please start
Baked into that
integrating them.
price.
Yeah, because, the Meteor, as great a missile as it is, with a range out to 200 plus kilometers, incredible throttleable ramjet engine, which means that it's got momentum going into hitting its target right till the end of its flight, is potentially already being outranged by variants of the PL-15 that Pakistan, China operate. That being the case, either one buys the next generation Meteor, or if we've got incredible rocketry here in India, which is being manifested in dual pulse rockets and ramjet driven air-to-air missiles, then why not just have our own weapons? It'll be, that would be a fraction of the cost of the Meteor, right? Plus it's built at home. We can step up its actual manufacture. And if it's integrated onto that platform, and if it's our weapon of choice. And that's the bottom line. The Air Force isn't going to buy air-to-air missiles if it doesn't work. The fact that you've got, and no government is going to push that upon the Air Force chief saying, no, we built this missile, you take it. He will take it only because when push comes to shove, that missile either works or people die. Right? So that being the case, if there is greater acceptance of Indian weapon systems and a great already existing acceptance of the Rafale, the two must come together. That's what they need to do.
I see a lot of the air chief in the things that are happening right now.
This air chief, great guy.
This air chief has made it very clear that he's going to call a spade a spade. He's not going to bother too much about who else is standing there on the stage with him. And if he's annoyed, he's going to let that annoyance show. He's done it, 3-4 times since he took over as air chief last year. And it hasn't even been a year and he's already, there are tremors in HAL every time this guy walks up to a podium.
No, but he's entirely job oriented. He has the awesome responsibility of defending our airspace. And he needs the tools and he needs the pilots, the training, the infrastructure, the logistics, the reliability, and a million of other things to all work all simultaneously.
So this to conclude this episode, this particular partnership that's been announced now between the Tatas and Dassault, let's forget that it's Dassault and Tata, but it's a partnership to build, which is like an announcement and a commitment to actually do something concrete. That must be like a dream for the air chief to actually hear something like that.
Well, he would certainly be very happy, and I'm reading out a quote from what they released yesterday. This is a significant step towards strengthening the country's aerospace manufacturing capabilities and supporting global supply chains. And just one more little bit about this. Under the scope of the partnership, Tata Advanced Systems will set up a cutting-edge production facility in Hyderabad for the manufacture of key structural sections, including the lateral shells of the rear fuselage, the complete rear section, the central section and the front section. So this is win-win. The Rafale is being built over here. The IAF or some in the IAF would be saying, he may as well buy it. But the others are going to come hard at the government of India saying, sorry, we have signed up on a process. You have agreed upon a process. We believe we can outprice the French. We believe we've got a product which is as good.
Or offer something.
And we believe we need to be assessed fairly. The government of India and the Air Force have to go through that process. Now the question is, how soon can they do that?
Geopolitical pressure.
Geopolitics isn't waiting for the Indian Air Force's selection process.
That is the truth.
That's the truth.
I mean, and the geopolitics on this specifically is may become too hot to handle. Let's not ever forget that we are only a few months out from Trump talking about the F-35. That's a whole new episode that we will be talking about as well. But Vishnu, this was a lot of fun. And just to end, I want to tell all of our viewers and listeners that Vishnu and I have had the privilege of flying in a Rafale, but like he said, Vishnu and I have flown in a whole bunch of other fighters as well. We are journalists. We're not pilots. There are very professional persons in government, in the Air Force, who make these decisions, and we only comment on those. And then finally, it's up to the system to decide what it wants to do going forward. But this is a win-win as far as the Indian manufacturing ecosystem is concerned. It's something that's very important to India because of aerospace jobs. Young Indians perhaps will not need to go abroad for some of these higher tech aerospace jobs. They can do it right here in India, and therefore that really is big. And of course, the primary advantage of all of this is the Air Force getting the weapons it needs to fight on time, in good numbers, at high quality. And what better if much of those things are actually built here in India. So with that little disclaimer that we never make a choice or push any aircraft, and we will be talking about all the other aircraft. I promise, Vishnu.
Yeah, no, 100%.
MRFA needs another episode, right?
It certainly does, because they're great aircraft.
I think you've flown all the MRFA aircraft.
I haven't flown the F-15, but you're talking about the Gripen?
We'll do that together.
You were talking about the Gripen?
Yeah.
How many sorties have I done on that?
Please don't tell me it's like more than one.
5.
5. Oh, that's horrible. Horrible. It's like a beautiful aircraft. So yeah, you can probably...
And all the Tejas fans watching this will be cursing me for that, right?
So well, we've also flown the Tejas. So,
that's true.
So we push the Tejas as well. Tejas is my favorite aircraft right now. I have no bones in saying that. I flew with the Air Marshal Narendeshwar Tiwari, who's now a commander-in-chief as well. So the Tejas is going to be an all-new episode. As you can see, Vishnu and I can go on and on. This is episode 6.
We're trying to end this episode. We keep chatting about this.
We have to bring it to an end.
So no, but when the Tejas story, sorry, one more point. You know who was heading the National Flight Test Center when I flew the Tejas?
Who?
The chief.
Oh,
the present chief.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason why he feels so strongly about it.
I do.
Yeah.
I entirely
And
biased.
he comes from a place of having more than enough skin in the game, and that's why he's all his words need to be taken so seriously. Anyway, Vishnu, this was the next episode. Says our producer Anviti will be with us flying. I don't know if we'll get permission for that, but Vishnu and I will try and do that.
Ejection seats have weight restrictions. Now, that may not impact you, but progressively it is impacting
we
me.
We shall get Vishnu to lose a little weight so that he can fit into a cockpit the next time. Because when he actually flew a fighter, he was much thinner than he is right now. But thanks so much for listening, guys. This was a fun episode. Lots of good things to talk about. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Goodbye.